edition of Readings. We have with us two very important Indian voices in literature, Upamanyu Chatterjee and Amit Chaudhuri. Upamanyu Chatterjee is a very acclaimed writer and civil servant. His books have won various awards, including the Sahitya Academy Award. His first book, English August, was published in 1988 and was an instant bestseller. It's basically the story of Agastya Sen, a young administrative officer who gets posted in this dusty town of Madna, and is also a story of alienation and the deep divide between urban and rural India. English August is poetic, witty, and restless, and it was also a story of its time and told in a very beautiful way. I'd invite Upamanyu to please read from the text.
Is that on?
Yeah.
Testing? Yeah.
Yeah.
Why, thank you. It embarrasses me to read from a text that is 24 years old. And I hope that with age it's matured and not turned rancid. For those of you not familiar with the book, I should add that Agastya Sen, as you just pointed out, is a civil servant sent off to a small town called Madna to be trained in the wiles of district administration. I've chosen the passage in which Agastya goes to meet for the first time Srivastav, the collector of Madna, his mentor, his boss, during the months of training. To prepare for that meeting, Agastya gets stoned. District administration in India is largely a British creation, like the railways and the English language, another complex and unwieldy bequest of the Raj. But Indianization of a method of administration or of a language is integral to the Indian story. Before 1947, the collector was almost inaccessible to the people. Now he keeps open house, primarily because he does a different, more difficult job. He is as human and as fallible, but now others can tell him so, even though he still exhibits the old accoutrements, but now Indianized, of importance. The flashing orange light on the roof of the car, the passes for the first row at the sitar recital, which will not start until he arrives, and for which he will not arrive until he has ensured by telephone that everyone else who has been invited has arrived first. In Madna, as in all of India, one's importance as an official could be gauged by how long one could keep a concert to which one was invited, waiting. The organizers never minded this of the officials they invited. Perhaps they expected it of them, which was sickening, or perhaps they were humoring them, which was somehow worse. And administration is an intricate business, and a young officer who lacks initiative cannot really be trained in its artifices. There is very little that he can learn from watching someone else. Agastya learned nothing. For a very short while, he worried about his ignorance and then decided to worry about it properly when others discovered it. The collectorate of Madna was one building among many in a vast field, which could not be called a compound, for it had no wall or gate, near the railway station. He'd missed them all in the dark of the previous evening. The jeep inched its way through people and cattle onto an untarred, metalled road. He saw a few flags against the hot, clean sky. The national flag, he presumed, was over the collectorate. What are the other buildings? That's the office of the superintendent of police, sir, said the Naib Tehsildar from behind. And over there are the police lines. Whatever they are, thought Agastya. That's the district and sessions court. And behind there, that big one, the district council. You mean on which there's also the national flag? Sir, and then that side behind the offices of the sub-divisional officer, the Tehsildar, etc. While the Naib Tahsildar was pointing out the buildings, the driver nearly ran over a child defecating beside the road and snarled at her in the vernacular. On their left was some kind of pond with thick green water and the heads of contented buffalo. Scores of people sitting on their haunches, smoking, wandering, gazing at anything moving or at other people. Most were in white dhoti, kurta, and Gandhi cap. Or was it Nehru cap, wondered Agastya. No, Gandhi cap and Nehru jacket. Or Gandhi jacket and Nehru cap. And Patel vest, Mountbatten lungi, Rajaji shawl, and Tagore dhoti. Some had towels over their heads. The jeep chugged through them, honking petulantly. The people sitting on the road stood up and moved away at the last moment, reluctantly. Some scowled. For them, the road was the one stretch that the rains of Madna wouldn't immediately turn to mud. Therefore, it was a place of assemblage. They covered their heads because of the heat, no? Yes, sir. It seemed wise to bother not about appearance, but first about health. He tried his handkerchief over his head, but it was too small. The Naib Tehsildar chuckled appreciatively. Too small, sir. Napkins easily available in the market. If sir wants, I'll get one. Yes, thanks, please do that. How much will it cost? Not to worry about price, sir. Rubbish, said Agastya, and offered him a 20-rupee note. The Naib Tehsildar raised his hands to ward off the horror. No, sir, not to bother, sir. Hardly must, sir. Agastya was momentarily distracted by the hardly must. What could he mean? He reached over and, ignoring the Naib Tehsildar's giggles and soft shrieks, put the note in his shirt pocket, among the spectacle case, papers, and pens. In all those months, he never got used to the crowds outside the offices. All these people have work here. Yes, sir, said the Naib Tehsildar, a little surprised, perhaps at the stupidity of the question. They all looked patient, as though waiting for entrance to the political rally of some awesome demagogue, Nehru perhaps, or one of his descendants. To him, they also looked stoned. Their eyes were glazed, probably with waiting, and followed every movement around them without curiosity. Just near the collectorate, he saw cannabis growing wild. That was nice, and he smiled, somehow symbolic. He would have to return alone one evening. The collectorate was a one-story stone building. Its corridors had benches and more people. They moved through another door and down a central corridor, also crowded with people, benches, and water coolers. Another door with C.K. Joshi RDC above it. There were 3 men inside. They mumbled something. They all stood, shook hands. The 2 younger ones called him sir. All introduced themselves. Agastya didn't catch a single name, didn't bother. Thank God for marijuana, he thought. Formal, pleasant conversation. Someone brought in thick, sweet tea, which the others drank from their saucers. After some slow, haphazard guesswork, he decided that the man on his right was Ahmed. Joshi was or should be the old jovial man behind the desk. On his right was what had sounded like Agarwal. Ahmed was immediately obnoxious, with blank eyes and a false smile. He never listened when anyone else was speaking, but always looked down at his thick forearms and flexed them. Both Ahmed and Agarwal were deputy collectors, direct recruits, sir. Whatever that was, thought Agastya, but nodded with what he hoped was appropriate awe. He eventually got to know, but by accident, as it were, what a deputy collector direct recruit was and where a Naib Tehsildar stood in the revenue hierarchy. He himself made no effort to know his new world. As it unfolded, it looked less interesting to him. And later, even to see how far he could extend his ignorance became an obscure and perverse challenge. Sitting with the three men, he was again assailed by a sense of the unreal. I don't look like a bureaucrat. What am I doing here? Should have been a photographer or a maker of ad film, something like that, shallow and urban. How old are you, sir? 28. Agastya was 24, but he was in a lying mood. He also disliked their faces. Are you married, sir? Again, that demand that he classify himself. Ahmed leaned forward for each question, neck tensed and head angled with politeness. Yes, he wondered for a second whether he should add twice. And your Mrs., sir? Agarwal's voice dropped at Mrs. In all those months, all references to wives were in hushed, almost embarrassed tones. Agastya never knew why. Perhaps because to have a wife meant that one was fucking, which was a dirty thing. She's in England. She's English anyway, but she's gone there for a cancer operation. She has cancer of the breast. He had an almost uncontrollable impulse to spread out his fingers to show the size of the tumor and then the size of the breast, but he decided to save that for later. Later in his training, he told the district inspector of land records that his wife was a Norwegian Muslim. He went on like this, careless with details. His parents were in Antarctica, members of the first Indian expedition. Yes, even his mother, she had a PhD in oceanography from the Sorbonne. After a while, the personal questions stopped. Later, he felt guilty, but only for a very brief while. Someone poked his head in and said that the collector had come. Joshi accompanied Agastya. Srivastav was short and fat and shouting at someone standing in front of him when they entered. He asked them to sit down and continued shouting. If you can tick off a subordinate in the language, thought Agastya, you're really fluent. On the far side of the desk stood a trembling black suppliant, weeping fresh tears as though he had just been beaten. The other old man being shouted at turned out to be the district supply officer. Later, Agastya would conclude that they all looked the same, the denizens of the collectorate, aging, with soft faces that hadn't seen much sunlight. They all wore pale shirts and loose pants. Their shirt pockets bulged outrageously with pens and spectacle cases. Most smelt nice of some very Indian perfume or scented hair oil or pan. They could withstand, like placid buffalo, anything that an industrious superior could shriek at them. The district supply officer's face shone gently in the volley from the collector. Thank you.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to read or hear English August. Of course, I have a personal sort of thank you to give Upamanyu because as a young student, when amidst a lot of family expectation of becoming an IS officer and giving the administrative service exam, I could show them English August and tell them that I'd prefer to be a college teacher. So thank you for writing that book.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. We have our second author, which is Amit Chaudhuri. Amit Chaudhuri is a writer, academic, and a musician. He's also edited several collections of essays, poetry, and short stories. His first book, A Strange and Sublime Address, was the Commonwealth Writers' Prize winner. And his other books, which is The Immortal and Afternoon Rag, have also won various awards. Both Afternoon Rag and The Immortals use music as a primary character. And like his prose style, which is actually a lot like music, Amit Chaudhuri describes Calcutta very beautifully in A Strange and Sublime Address, almost like, capturing the everyday pathos and beauty of the city of Calcutta. And now he's come back with a new book on Calcutta, which is called Calcutta, 2 Years in the City. and he'd like to read from that book. Thank you.
This is a work of non-fiction, and so maybe it is my first book of non-fiction if you don't count my essays. Is this kind of, am I audible? Yeah. So it's a book that I was reluctant to write when my agent, agents have taken the place of the muse nowadays. So agent had approached me with this idea of writing, since I had written 3 books of novels about Calcutta, writing a non-fiction book about the city. Excited by the sudden success of Maximum City by Suketu Mehta. And in 2005, when he asked me to do this, I said no. Because it's difficult to write an epic about my Calcutta, and also the Calcutta that had excited me, I felt had passed. In 2007, I began to think that this other post-Bhadralok Calcutta might be written about. And I won't go into why I had that kind of change of mind. So the book is called Calcutta 2 Years in the City, and the 2 years covered are between 2009 to 2011. So just as, coincidentally, the elections which throughout the left-front government happened during this span, but certainly that was not something that I foresaw. During the writing of this book, I thought I should do some serious research, which I'd never done before as a novelist. And used to go out to Park Street, where I used to hang out anyway, and go and try to talk to people over there who were not very forthcoming in their replies. So I tried to still bravely make something of this, and therefore began to write of things that I was familiar with in Park Street, places like Fleury's, but also a hotel called Nothing, actually. It didn't have a name. It was a bench with some cooking pots. It was a hotel in that special Indian sense, which covers a lot of kind of sorts of places, varieties of places serving food. It was a pavement stall, not even a stall. And next to it was another hotel which I never saw anyone either sit at or serve at, called the Jundland Hotel. So I began to become familiar with some of the people who hung out over there. Now, this chapter, which is called Jundland Hotel, is what I'm going to read out from. And it covers a period of time which includes Christmas. So what I'm describing here is Christmas Day, and talking about my own sort of weakness for Fleury's to begin with, this tea shop in Calcutta. So it's afternoon. I've just emerged after Christmas lunch from the posh Bengal club with my wife. And I said, let's go and get some caffeine in Fleury's. So let's go to Fleury's, I said, knowing fully we'd have to wait to get in. In my mind was the undeniable realization, Christmas comes once a year, uttered by the angel floating ministeringly at one shoulder, with the devil at the other shoulder adding, and you're half a minute away from Park Street. Perhaps they were both angels? And in which part of the world could you have such a Christmas afternoon with its special, aimless anticipation, except in Calcutta and here? People were at large. They looked unaware of various things, of the complex history that killed Christmas on this street and now, for whatever reason, had resurrected it. There's something almost miraculous about the continual return of Christmas to Park Street. It's a miracle that, despite the fact that all miracles are apocryphal, I didn't want to miss. As with all festive occasions these days in this city, what had once started probably in the 19th century as part of a secular metamorphosis the emergence of a new, busy, pleasure-loving middle class, a fresh air of celebration, is now woven into a cheery provincialism of a city no longer emblematic but ordinary, yet uncannily lit by its past. The strollers on Park Street seemed as unmindful of yesterday as they were of history. Christmas Eve didn't survive even as memory. They were on their way somewhere for no good reason, as we were, to Fleury's. The hawkers were selling the little clay Santas with the mildly nodding heads and parsimonious beards, as if Christmas Eve was still a few days away. It didn't occur to them or to the passers-by that you mightn't want anything to do with Santa, clay or otherwise, once Christmas Eve was over. I had once bought one for my daughter a few years ago, and she didn't want anything to do with it then. It stood on a shelf for 2 weeks, its head vibrating every time you struck it with your finger, and then its one color began to fade, the already faint red ebbing into something like an impressionist's wash. Its inside was white and hollow like a bell. As with such objects, they become hand-me-downs to the less privileged, and a maid took it for her daughter after I reluctantly consented to part with it. Fleury's was full of afternoon revelers. We would not need to wait for 15 minutes to enter. I had a sudden urge, not so sudden, the thought was at the back of my mind, to check out Ramayan Shah's. Ramayan Shah being the person who ran one of these hotels, but was never around. I only rarely got to meet him. You could come with me, but my wife shook her head and indicated she'd wait for my return here in the small queue keeping vigil outside Fleury's. Okay, back in 10 minutes, we should have a table by then. And I went down the steps and past the magazine vendors and across the road, having loosened my tie, folded my jacket, the last sign of the Bengal Club luncheon, on the crook of my arm. There was activity at the petrol station and in front of Mocambo, of course. But coming to Ramayan Shah's, I found an odd solitude, a release of purpose. A strange cessation reigned here. This wasn't only because Ramayan Shah was missing again. Did it really matter if he was there or not? More and more he seemed a symbol of elusiveness, like Godot. But that the inner rhythm here was different from the rest of the neighborhood and from its own incarnation on normal days. Right next to Nagendra's ironing stand were 2 figures asleep on string beds, covered from toe to head in sheets, keeping out in the shroud-like form of rural Indian sleepers what this country has in such abundance and what makes it so attractive: sound and daylight. They were still, but crawling with flies. Christmas possibly had given them justification to withdraw into this cocoon. Where's Nagendra? I asked. Nagendra is the man who runs the ironing stall next to the eating place. I asked, thinking too that our table at Fleury's might now be available. A man dicing vegetables gestured towards one of the motionless figures on which dozens of Christmas flies had alighted. Alighted, it became clear in a second, with no long-term commitment to the venue. A little further off, Ramayan Shah's son Hridayanand was scouring a pot with a dreamlike containment, neither happy nor unhappy. I think he was probably incapable of being unhappy, or like most children was unhappy about immediate rather than overarching matters. Right now he was more bored than unhappy. Since sociological rigor is essential when you're writing of a city, I asked the man dicing vegetables who he was and, intrusively, what his earnings were like. He said he was Gupta, proprietor of the Jundland Hotel. I'd noticed the unostentatious handwritten sign long ago and had been cautioned that it was not the name of Ramayan Shah's outfit. This neglected space, this bit of nothing, left for future use between Nagendra's stall and Ramayan Shah's stove, I'd always presumed belonged to the latter, that it served a function in his 2-decade-old enterprise. But on meeting Gupta, the Jundland Hotel acquired for me a tenuous territorial shape. Gupta, in reply to my socio-economic query, said he earned 150 rupees a day. This was odd because I'd never seen him plying his trade, but it was clearly either the average on the pavement near Mocambo or a number that tripped easily off the Bihari tongue. That's because everybody used to say to me they earn 150 rupees a day. On Christmas Day, he admitted he made less. I would have questioned him further about this disappointing dip in his income, but wanted to get back to Fleury's while I still stood a chance of getting a table. At the traffic lights, I saw a deeply familiar figure on the opposite side, sitting amidst the concourse of motley people any festive day in Calcutta comprises, on the white parapet outside the large window of Fleury's, studying me with a mixture of distant empathy and interest. It was my wife, R. She'd abandoned the queue and opted, as she often does, to sit down. She looked at me as if she'd never expected to see me again. I was simply surprised to find her where she was. But the queue had dissolved and we got into Fleury's almost instantly. "Did you notice the woman beside me?" she asked when we were seated. Although I do notice women, I often find that I don't notice the same kind that R does. She'd been sitting next to a small family on the parapet. Now that she mentioned her, I did recall someone at R's side. "The person in the green Salwar Kameez," she said exasperatedly, but the color of the clothing hadn't registered itself on my mind's eye. What had imprinted itself there was that she was, for the want of a more delicate expression, someone from a different class background, someone with a very different horizon, someone ordinary and well-known and yet, at the same time, little known. All this, as it were, I knew, although I hadn't noticed the color of her Salwar Kameez. It was she, on seeing that R wanted to sit down, who had invited her to. "There's space here." And there was. The parapet distends just there like a swelling lip and becomes ample. R told me how this woman came here with her family at this time of the year annually because the ledge outside Fleury's provided her with a view of an incredible stream of life on the 25th. She spoke to me first in Bengali and then in Hindi, R said, and this was worth remarking on because only a generation ago, Bengalis spoke a risible, embarrassing Hindi and even looked down upon that language. In the last 30 years, not only had Bengal fallen, but so had the once vaunted Bengali language. And in the meanwhile, a new kind of Bengali person had come into being and increased in small towns, suburbs, outskirts, and even in the metropolis, which these days felt as if it were on the outskirts of somewhere itself, or like an agglomeration of little towns, in which people watched Hindi films on DVDs and a daily ration of Hindi reality shows and Bengali soaps. Most of this audience couldn't but be proficient in Hindi. The woman in the green Salwar Kameez was one such Bengali, while R and I had a foot sufficiently planted in a superannuated Bengal for us to find this unself-conscious lapsing into Hindi worth commenting on. Streamers hung from the ceiling of Fleury's as it always does during Christmas. After ordering the menu's relatively recent brewed filter coffee, earlier it was simply coffee, I apologized to my wife and said I'd like to step out for 10 minutes and speak briefly to the woman she'd been sitting next to. Clearly, I'm not good company these days. R sees me not so much as a person occasionally seized by inspiration or curiosity, but by inklings of excitement. Either it has to do with music or a particular sound or idea, or, as was the case now, with Christmas and the city. "Go," she instructed me. "The coffee will take at least 15 minutes. Like me, she too was vaguely stirred by the notion of a family sitting outside Fleury's on the ledge, looking at the same world that we were from behind the window, but at greater proximity. So as not to unduly alarm the woman in the green Salwar Kameez, I introduced myself as the husband of the person who had been keeping her company 5 minutes ago. She was cautious but not hostile. She made room for me in the space R had just vacated. I'd seen faces like hers before, in northern Spain, in China, a new kind of provincial who populates the globalized world, who changes with its changes without ever traveling outside of the country, even beyond their city or town. This lady, for instance, she lived in Salt Lake, a suburb created in the late 70s not far from the airport, and she'd come here to Park Street to spend the afternoon. She introduced me to her son, a shy boy of 17 or 18, who she said studied at something institution, I couldn't catch the name, and to her sister who resembled her but was older, less pretty, and seemed to know it. She was waiting, she said with a tremor of humor and anticipation, for her husband to return from the KFC on Middleton Street. The only false note occurred when I asked her what she did. Withdrawing a tiny bit, she said prevaricatingly, service. This could mean any kind of regular employment, an ordinary white-collar job, anything grander, and she'd have been specific. I felt again that I'd seen people like her in other parts of the world, out on a walk, going down a promenade or past some shops, entirely of a locality, a place, but also entirely of the present, the here and now. Sitting next to her, waiting for her husband to return, I thought I could have been, and probably was, anywhere. A friend visiting from London tells me how he likes the Calcutta Christmas much more than he likes the English one. I do too, but he has specific reasons. And he has no memory of a Calcutta Christmas to refer back to. Calcutta, in effect, has no past for him. He's only been here once before. There's not much sign of the crucifix here, he says. You don't have that awful mournfulness of Christianity. It's all about Santa, he concludes, nodding. He has seen gigantic simulacra of the bearded gift-bearer in shopping malls, in front of restaurants. Although globalization in its full-blown form is yet to reach Bengal, its apparitions this December are clearly visible. Thus, the striking Kumbhakarna-like dimensions of the many Santa Clauses. And there aren't that many nativity scenes, he says. In fact, I haven't seen any. He's right. It's an absence I hadn't noticed, perhaps with good reason. In Aparna Sen's lovely first film, 36 Chorangi Lane, the director almost forces an analogy when she plays a recording of a tenor singing stratospherically Silent Night over visuals of destitutes sleeping on bridges and pavements. To find a representation of the nativity, one might need to go to a church, but on the whole, the miraculous birth is unremarked upon. The predominant atmosphere of Christmas here has never been one of solitary stock-taking or of the notion of the return of God to earth, but of make-believe. For me, the principal emblem of Christmas in Calcutta is neither Santa, nor the Nativity, nor the cross, but the Christmas tree. Almost no one in Calcutta has seen a real one. It enters certain spaces, the middle-class living room, the showroom and shop, the cafe, but it's we who, with its seasonal proximity, are traveling inadvertently towards the faraway. With its fake, shiny bristles, it represents a journey. It's also a reminder that the faraway can't be manufactured. Perhaps it is always manufactured. It's also a reminder that the faraway can be manufactured. Perhaps it's always manufactured. No one misses the actual Christmas tree. To eventually see one is not so much a disappointment as a matter of slight puzzlement. I saw real Christmas trees again recently, being sold on a pavement in the Angel in London, unloaded from a truck, arranged and covered in gauze so that they resembled somewhat the inert botanical figures in The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I was fascinated by them, but received no final illumination, as they seemed a bit off the point, as Christmas outside of Calcutta seems generally. Once you've experienced a genuine transplantation, a genuine fake, as it were, an offshoot that takes on its own life, you lose, strangely, your appetite for and your capacity to recognize the original. This might explain, from more than 4 decades of living memory, the historical radiance of the Christmas trees of Newmarket. Thank you.
Upamanyu, would you like to read some more, or because we still have time? I think less than 20 minutes. You both read, probably.
Were you looking at your watch all the time?
Yeah, I sort of started with that watch consultation.
We could just talk, actually. Yeah.
Not even.
You talk about the beauty in ordinariness. I mean, that's what I observe about all your novels, you know, the beauty in ordinary lives, in ordinary everyday experiences. Like in Strange and Sublime Address, that little boy's annual vacation becomes that stable center, which he returns to every year. Is it the outsider's gaze which helps you discover that kind of beauty and look at the city with those eyes?
I think let's put aside the word beauty, which is a wonderful word and shouldn't fall into entire disrepute as it has. But let's put aside it for a while and talk about strangeness, because the word strange kept occurring in the novel and it occurs in the title.
Right.
At that time I wasn't very conscious of it, but now when I look back, I become conscious of the fact that strangeness is what, rather than beauty, or maybe along with beauty, which has interested me. A lot of people used to think I grew up, although despite what the novel told them about the fact that this was a boy visiting Calcutta and growing up in Bombay. A lot of people thought that I grew up in Calcutta and that I was therefore writing about home. But I wasn't. I was writing about about visits to Calcutta in that first novel. And what was interesting about the place that I visited was that it was in Bhawanipur, which is by some people called the North Calcutta of the South.
Okay.
So the North Calcutta has a particular kind of atmosphere, which one would in other cities associate with the old town. You know, so Bhawanipur has that kind of atmosphere in the more recent South. So I suppose what I was always drawn to was the slightly foreign in cities you think you know. People used to think I was writing about home, but I was actually writing about foreignness all the time. I began to think about writing about Calcutta when my parents moved in Bombay from where I had grown up after my father retired to St. Cyril Road, which was a Christian area. And when I was living in England, then I used to come back to St. Cyril Road, and I'd look at this bizarre and quite wonderful area, again thinking that, where is this? Where am I? And I think it's that quality of foreignness which you might be talking about, which used to make the ordinary strange. So, yeah, I suppose it's strangeness that interests me in localities. Things which seem to be of a place, but maybe also seem to be somewhere else.
Right. The strangeness of an incomplete modernity, is that also what you're looking at? Because the modern also comes across in your writing. I mean, the way in which Calcutta embraces or rejects or uses that idea of the incompleteness of modernity. So, is that something which is also there in your new book?
Well, modernity is something that I first encountered in Calcutta, as I say in this book. And by modernity, I mean something, again, I've tried very laboriously and painfully to describe or define what I might mean by modernity. And I don't know if I've made it clear to anybody, but by modernity, I don't mean electric lights, trains, telephones, but I mean for me, a particular experience of the city, which encompasses, let's say, grime, dereliction, a certain kind of vibrancy.
Alienation.
Not alienation as much as strangeness, movement between, say, streets and localities being enough to make you feel that you've gone to a different place. You don't have to travel all over the world to do that. And that I first found in Calcutta. And it then kind of informed the way I looked at cities and what it was that excited me about cities. So when I went in 1979 to San Diego, it was my first experience of a suburban city, totally suburban city where you needed a car to move around in. And it was extremely pretty and I was very suffocated and I didn't know why I was suffocated. Then we went to New York. The city was not doing well at all. It was economically sort of in a kind of, not in a very good way. Yet it reminded me of Calcutta because of those particular contradictions where moving from street to street, place to place, you thought you'd moved somewhere new. So I suppose that sense of estrangement and those contradictions where dereliction, but some kind of vibrancy happening together, that is what I think of as modernity. I felt that had somehow disappeared by the late 70s in Calcutta, which is why I found it difficult to write about the city for a long time as it was now.
Right. it's also changed a lot now from what it was. I mean,
It's changing constantly because of the destruction of houses,
yeah, the
neighborhoods.
lights also, interestingly.
Those trident-like
Yeah,
lights that
yeah.
Mamata Banerjee has
Yeah,
introduced.
yeah.
Yes, definitely. It makes the whole city look like a puja pandal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah. Upamanyu, you write about the opposite of the city, the nation which lies outside and often in neglect. Over the years and also in your writing, has that changed at all from where we saw the nation in English August?
Can I pass? Can I just, it's, you know, you know, English August is not about the nation, it's about this guy feeling out of place. I mean, it's about feeling out of place in your own country. I don't think it's about, I mean, it's not a sort of national statement or anything.
Yeah, but the nation is also about not being at home with the nation, right? So, in that sense.
Well, I'll take your word for it, but no, it's, you know, I thought Augustus Sen has enough problems without, you know, you're adding to them. But he,
well, it's bound to have problems.
I've heard that English August was a political novel, but it really isn't, you know. None of those books are. I don't think so. I don't think I have any views on, you know, India is not a nation. I don't have any views on this. I mean, can we pass to the second question?
I think that's one of the things that I like about English August, in contrast to the other writers who emerged in that generation. Not very much older than me, but still, I mean, slightly older. In that, it's a generation in many ways that was deeply interested in the nation and made the novel somehow a kind of almost a metaphor for that.
Right.
But our Upamanyu here, the civil servant, didn't fit in that, in his novel, and that's drawn me to the work.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, it's the story of alienation. It's the story of disillusionment in that sense, yeah. But I also wanted to know as to how do you see it today? I mean, you're still a civil servant, so do you fit in?
How do I see what?
Yourself.
Well, I'm fine. I mean, I should. I'm just, you know, stop. You know, I might not look okay, but I'm fine. I mean, absolutely fine. How do you see yourself? I mean, no, you know, I'm okay.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, I mean, let me reassure you. Yeah, no, I really don't know what you mean. I mean, do you mean that you know, writers thrive on bile, on misanthropy? All of us do. So, if you mean, do I hate people? The answer is of course. But that has nothing to do with the state of the nation. You know, I hate everybody.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that.
Should we throw the session open to audience questions because we are in time? Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, I may be as unsuccessful as the moderator. A question for Mr. Chatterjee first, if I may. You've written so wonderfully and excruciatingly about the dysfunctions of administration. And when you close English August, you are absolutely certain that nothing good can ever come from government. So I'd never had the courage to read your subsequent books. But I did say that if I ever meet this man, and it was a shock to me that you're actually an administrator, right, I would ask him a perverse question, which was, in your viewpoint, what would be good administrative reform? What would it consist of? And I hope you do attempt to answer this question, just to...
Like perverse.
Why did you say perverse? Why did she say this? One, I think you should, you know, work up the guts to read the subsequent books. That's one. You know, English August is, I've said this for 20 years, English August is not primarily about the civil service and how awful the country is. It's about this one guy feeling out of place. And when I was writing it, I used to think that, my God, no one's going to read this. because, there are no women, there's no heat and dust. There's this guy who's just sort of masturbating. That's all he's doing. So how does one get people, how do you get the reader interested? So you put in as many jokes as possible. So it's not primarily about that world. It's about him. It's about, as I said, it's about him feeling out of place. But then there is no accounting for, for reactions, particularly when there were good reviews and things. And all the good reviews said that, it's about how nothing works. But anyway, that's how I feel. It's not really about the civil service. And I've been in there now for almost 30 years, and it takes care of roti, kapda, makan. So I'm completely schizophrenic, so I lead double lives. The subsequent books, well, there's one that's about Agastya Sen continued, but the others have nothing to do with that world. And I find that if you have a sort of 9 to 5, then you're not under pressure to make a living out of writing. So you can take your own time to write what you want. Does that answer your question? Probably not. Yeah.
No.
I lost track, actually.
Yeah, please.
Hello. Good evening, sir. As we observe, most of the Indian fiction in English is focused on metro cities like Mumbai novels or Delhi novels. And where are the small cities and villages? In some cases, like Adiga's White Tiger, is written about the rural Bihar, but it is totally outsider view, and the characters are not even caricatures, let alone the real characters. So where are the novels which tells the story of real India, 70–80%, where the Indians live and they are resilient, surviving on a 5–10 rupees per day earning. So where are the English fiction which tells the story of real India?
That's good.
You go for it.
Chips. Toss. Please.
Are they being written in Hindi, those novels? I don't know. I mean, it's a difficult one, the real India.
Yeah.
It's a question I've heard for many years. I don't have the answer to it. Maybe in Hindi novels. Srilal Shukla, would you consider that the real India?
No, I think the question is why aren't you writing?
I'm trying to evade the question.
English writers.
Writing about
and
Bihar. Why aren't you writing about Bihar?
About Bihar.
No, I know. You write about the subjects that interest you. So I'm Bihari. I was born in Patna, but I haven't been to Bihar since a very long time. So I write about the stuff that interests me. Ditto for him.
Anyway, the idea of the real India. I mean, this is also cliche to say that what is this real India? Also, I mean, I just said that what draws me to something like English August, but also draws me for a certain reason. I mean, it needn't draw everybody for that reason. The fact that somebody is taking that step of not addressing this question of the real India or writing about India, I think that's a great thing, not to write about it, not to write about India. I think that is being done by a lot of people, and it has also become, you talked about your civil service job being a bread and butter, but writing about the real India and India is also bread and butter for a lot of people. And it's good to sometimes take a step not to write about this notion of the nation. And, explore what it is that sort of interests you, which in itself, finding out first of all, what it is that interests you and what your material is a difficult enough job as a writer. And then to develop as a writer, to find out what your new interests are, and that you might not be any longer interested in the things that made you well known as a writer. These are the kind of problems that writers are, face, besides the craft of writing. And other things, come in more subliminally, more subconsciously. You don't begin by thinking, I have not still addressed the problem of the new India, I should start doing this now.
Also, there's no one real India again. It's
That's
reality itself.
what I said at the beginning.
Yeah.
I said, of course, that is a bit of a cliche, but it's
Yeah.
true too. Yeah.
And yes. Oh, somebody has to give the mic there. Right at the back.
My question is for Amit Chaudhuri. You very successfully managed to do well both in your writing and your music. What I wanted to know is, how do you manage to straddle these two worlds, and are there sometimes unexpected results that you're trying to write a novel or a short story and it resulted in you writing a song, for instance, or on the other hand, you were trying to compose something and then it led to an idea for a novel or a short story?
I suppose, again, since I do music and because I write, people are making connections and also asking me often, whether there's any connection between my persona as a musician and my persona as a writer. When I'm a musician, when I'm practicing in the morning, when I'm performing, I have no consciousness of being a writer. When I write, I don't at all think I'm a musician. There's the question, it's like a disconnectedness, it's like a split personality, but it's also like knowing more than one language. So now when you know, let's say 2 or 3 languages, you'll find that when you move from language to language, that each language presents a different self to you and a different opportunity. Even when you begin to imitate somebody by speaking in another accent, you inhabit a slightly different persona. You become a slightly different person. There are very few writers who can make, let's say, their bilingual background or multilingual background actually work in terms of herbs, in terms of producing bodies of work. One was Arun Kolatkar, the poet who wrote both in English and in Marathi and had very different voices in both languages. And in his notebooks, which were posthumously published, he has a whole sequence of aphorisms and jottings, which were discovered later by Arvind Krishna Mehrotra and then put into this book, which he titled Making Love to a Poem, and which is about being a bilingual writer. And one of the aphorisms is, I keep a pencil sharpened at both ends. Because of the different opportunities that each language presents. I think moving between genres is similar to moving between languages. Each presents a different opportunity, and you forget the other when you're in this other domain.
Yeah. Gentleman at the back. Just one more.
My question is to Mr. Chatterjee. I hope he doesn't evade a fork in a question. Have you ever met with allegations of blasphemy from within the government's ranks regarding your works? And while or before writing some of your works, is there any intrusion of censorship because of your job, sir?
No, not at all. Why blasphemy? No, not at all. In fact, frankly, I didn't think English August would ever be published. But it was, and I mean, not only did nothing happen, but I received very cheery, cheerful, heartwarming letters from senior civil servant saying, it's amazing, that's exactly what happened to us 15 years ago, and nothing's changed. It's as completely mad as ever, etc. And really nice letters from all over India. Very, very nice. No, absolutely nothing. One of the reasons, I guess, was that, it was, the book was irreverent, but it was also, as I said, it's about human beings, so it's not as though, if you're laughing at anything, you're just laughing at yourself, at everyone. So, no, not at all.
Yeah. Last question.
Question for you. You wrote the book when you were beginning of the career, when you were starting just off IAS. Now you got about 5 years, 6 years ahead of you. Would you like to write a sequel to it? More so, the reputation you enjoy being an honest officer, how you look back on IAS. Do you think you're up to it to write a sequel?
Well, I did write a sequel. The Memories of the Welfare State has the same character, but that's a more straightforward comedy, I think. Yeah, it's possible, but whatever I had to say, all the jokes I had to crack, I've already cracked in those 2 books. So if I can, it's like a reservoir. If it fills up, then definitely, yeah, I think of a 3rd book. Yeah.
I've been told there's no time, but no more questions.
No more questions.
Sorry, questions can be out later. Yes. Should the authors proceed for the signing? Yes. Yeah, the authors can proceed for the signing, so you can also ask your questions there if you want the book signed. And I thank everybody and both of you for this session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.